Christmas night. Snow blanketed the suburban rooftop. Golden light from the windows cast shadows on the empty street. A middle-aged man sat in front of the fireplace, staring at an empty stocking hanging on the mantel. On the table, a card with childish handwriting read, "Merry Christmas, Daddy," from heaven. He smiled faintly, his eyes red-rimmed. Outside, the wind howled. Snow fell thick and heavy. Suddenly, a knock echoed at the door. He looked up, surprised. No one ever came to his house on Christmas. When he opened the door, standing before him was a woman holding a small child, both shivering in the snow. "I'm sorry, we have nowhere else to go." Daniel Ross, 36 years old, single dad, living alone in a suburban wooden house since his wife died in an accident 4 years ago. Every Christmas, he cooked 2 portions of dinner and placed a glass of wine next to his wife's photo. He kept the habit of turning on the porch light, so anyone lost could see the glow. This year, snow came earlier than usual. Daniel was about to close up early when he heard the knock and saw a young woman holding a daughter about 6 years old. Both were soaked through, trembling. "Can we take shelter for a moment?" He opened the door wider. "It's Christmas. No one should be left out in the cold." Her name was Lena Moore, 30 years old, single mom, lost her job due to illness and was looking for shelter. Her daughter was Ruby, 6 years old, with curly hair and eyes bright as crystal. They'd been living in an old car that broke down near town. Daniel made hot cocoa and gave Ruby a warm blanket that belonged to his late daughter. "This belonged to a little girl who used to live here," he said gently. Lena paused. "You have a daughter?" He nodded, his smile sad. "I did." The atmosphere was warm, but tinged with quiet sadness. Ruby ran around, looking at the Christmas tree without decorations. "Mister, why don't you have a star? There's no one to help me hang it anymore." "Can I help?" Daniel laughed. "Of course." Ruby hung an ornament on a branch, randomly placing it exactly where he used to put his daughter's star. He stood frozen, as if a memory had returned. The house felt different with them there. Not just warmer from the fire, but warmer in a way Daniel had forgotten was possible. The sound of Ruby's footsteps, the soft murmur of Lena's voice thanking him quietly, the sense that the walls were no longer just holding in his grief, but holding something new, hope, maybe, or at least the possibility of it. Daniel watched Ruby examine each ornament with wonder, her small fingers gentle on the fragile glass. She reminded him so much of Lily at that age, full of questions and excitement about everything. "Mister, did your daughter like Christmas?" Ruby asked, holding up a small wooden angel. Daniel's throat tightened. "She loved it. She used to count down the days starting in September." "Me too," Ruby beamed. "But this year Mommy said we might not have Christmas because—" She stopped, glancing at her mother. Lena's face flushed. "Ruby, don't bother Mr. Ross with Daniel, just Daniel, and she's not bothering me." He knelt down to Ruby's level. "You know what? I think Christmas finds us wherever we are, even in places we don't expect." Ruby's eyes widened. "Really? Really? In fact, I think Christmas just knocked on my door." The little girl giggled, then yawned. Lena noticed and gently guided her to the couch. "You should rest, sweetheart." As Ruby settled under a blanket, clutching the warm cocoa, her eyes began to close. Within minutes, she was asleep, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. Daniel and Lena sat in the kitchen, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. "I don't know how to thank you," Lena said quietly. "Most people, they see someone like me and they look away. Or worse, they judge." "I'm not most people," Daniel replied. "I know what it's like to be invisible. After my wife died, people stopped seeing me. I became the widower, the sad man, the one you avoid at parties because you don't know what to say." Lena nodded. "After my husband left, I became the abandoned wife, the failure, the cautionary tale mothers tell their daughters." They shared a small, knowing smile, the kind that comes from recognizing your own pain in someone else's eyes. "How long have you been like this?" Daniel asked carefully. 3 months. I had a job, a decent one. Then I got sick, missed too much work, and they let me go." Lost the apartment a month later. We've been in the car since then, moving between parking lots, trying to stay under the radar. And Ruby's father? Lena's jaw tightened. He said a sick wife wasn't part of his plan, signed away his rights and disappeared. I haven't heard from him in over a year. Daniel felt anger rise in his chest. How could anyone abandon their child? His own daughter had been taken from him by tragedy, but he would have given anything for one more day with her. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be. We're better off without him. Ruby and I, we take care of each other. I can see that. She's a good kid. She's my whole world. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white silence. Inside, for the first time in 4 years, Daniel's house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a home. A neighbor later told reporters, I saw the porch light on that night. Daniel always left it on, but the house was always dark inside. That Christmas, for the first time in years, I saw shadows moving behind the curtains. Life, returning to a place that had been frozen in grief. Christmas morning. The snow had stopped falling. Ruby woke up and shrieked, "Oh, snow everywhere!" Daniel cooked breakfast, pancakes, eggs, cocoa. Lena was surprised. You made all this? I used to cook for 2. During the meal, Ruby asked, Mister, did you have a daughter? Daniel froze, then nodded. Her name was Lily. Where is she now? She's in a place where the snow is always white and it's never cold. Ruby went quiet, then whispered, She must be watching you and smiling. Lena's eyes filled with tears. They sat by the fireplace. Daniel shared his story. After I lost my wife, all I could do was work. People gradually avoided me, said I carried sadness in my eyes. I understand that feeling, Lena responded. When my husband left, everyone looked at me like I was a failure. They both laughed softly when Ruby accidentally dropped a cookie into the fireplace. First time in years, Daniel said. I've heard laughter in this house. They went outside to build a snowman together. Ruby placed 2 stones for eyes and said, This is Lily. She's playing with me. Daniel looked at the snow figure, feeling like his heart was melting in the cold. But the moment was deeper than just building a snowman. As they worked together, packing snow, shaping arms, finding the perfect stick for a smile, Daniel realized he was doing something he thought he'd never do again, creating a memory, a good one. Not one weighed down by loss, but one lifted by unexpected joy. Ruby was particular about the snowman's appearance. No, the head needs to be rounder, Mr. Daniel. Okay, boss, he laughed, reshaping it. Lena stood back, watching them, her heart aching with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Gratitude for this moment of normalcy, of kindness, fear that it couldn't last, that reality would intrude and take this fragile happiness away. You okay? Daniel asked, noticing her expression. She forced a smile. Just this feels too good to be true. Sometimes good things are just good things, no catch. In my experience, there's always a catch. He walked over to her, leaving Ruby to add final touches to their creation. Not this time. You showed up on my doorstep on Christmas Eve. I was alone, planning to spend another holiday talking to ghosts. You gave me something I thought I'd lost. You gave me a reason to turn on the lights in more than just the living room. Lena felt tears threatening. We're the ones who needed help. Maybe we needed each other. The afternoon passed in a blur of simple joys. They watched a Christmas movie, Ruby nestled between them on the couch. They made more cocoa. They talked about nothing and everything. Ruby drew pictures, which Daniel carefully pinned to the refrigerator next to years-old drawings from Lily. When Lena saw them side by side, she felt something shift inside her. This man, this grieving father, was making room in his preserved shrine of memories for new ones. That took courage she wasn't sure she possessed. As evening approached, Lena stood. We should go. We've imposed enough. Go where? Daniel asked. Your car is still broken down. We'll figure something out, we always do. Lena, look outside. The roads are icing over. It's not safe. Stay tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out the car situation. She wanted to argue, to maintain her independence, to not be a burden. But Ruby was warm and safe and happy. For once, maybe accepting help wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the smart choice. Are you sure? I'm sure, Ruby cheered. Sleepover. That evening, Daniel pulled out Lily's old room. He'd kept it exactly as it was, like a museum to the past. But as he opened the door for Ruby and Lena, he realized it was time to let it be a room again, not a memorial. She can sleep here, he said, his voice thick. Lena understood the significance. Daniel, we can sleep on the couch. We don't need to. Yes, you do, and so do I. I need this room to be used again. I need to remember that Lily would have wanted another little girl to be warm and safe here. Ruby explored the room with delight, finding dolls and books and a music box that played a gentle lullaby. This is the most beautiful room ever, she breathed. Daniel smiled through tears. It was, for the most beautiful girl. Your daughter? Yes. I'll take good care of it, I promise. I know you will. Later, after Ruby was asleep, Daniel and Lena sat by the dying fire. Thank you, she said. Not just for the room, for everything. For seeing us as people, not problems. You're not problems. You're people who needed a break. I was a person who needed a reminder that life still happens, even after loss. She reached over and squeezed his hand. He didn't pull away. Outside, fresh snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering their footprints from earlier, creating a clean slate. The mailman who delivered to that street later said, I'd been delivering to that house for 3 years. Daniel never smiled, never waved, just took his mail and closed the door. That Christmas morning, I saw him outside with a woman and a little girl, all of them laughing while building a snowman. I almost didn't recognize him. Joy changes of face. The next morning, police knocked on the door. Are you Daniel Ross? Someone reported you're holding people against their will. Daniel was stunned. Lena panicked. It's my ex-husband. He found me. The officer looked at Lena. We're just following a missing persons report, Ruby cried, holding her mother. I don't want to go. Daniel stepped forward. She and her daughter haven't done anything wrong. They just needed shelter. The officers hesitated. Lena quickly explained. My ex-husband owns the garage where I used to work. After I got sick, he threw me out, said I was ruining his reputation. They left, but issued a warning. If you stay here, you could be sued. Daniel clenched his fists. He decided, I won't let you wander in the snow again. He spent all night repairing the old car while Lena watched through the window, the light from the garage reflecting on the snow. Ruby slept soundly, clutching the teddy bear Daniel had given her. When the car started, Lena cried, You've saved us twice now. No, he smiled. You two saved me. But the confrontation wasn't over. That afternoon, a man showed up at Daniel's door, tall, expensive coat, cold eyes. Lena's ex-husband, Marcus. So this is where you've been hiding, Marcus sneered, looking past Daniel at Lena. I'm not hiding. I'm surviving, Lena said, standing tall despite her fear. Surviving. You're squatting in some stranger's house, filling our daughter's head with... She's not your daughter anymore, Lena interrupted. You signed away your rights, remember? I can unsign them. I can make your life hell. You know I can. Daniel stepped between them. You need to leave. Now, Marcus laughed. And who are you? The new boyfriend? Moving on pretty fast, aren't you, Lena? I'm the man whose property you're standing on without permission. So leave before I call those same cops you sent here yesterday. Marcus's smile faded. You have no idea who you're messing with. And you have no idea how little I care. Get off my property. For a moment, it looked like Marcus might escalate. His hands clenched, his jaw tightened. But something in Daniel's eyes, a hardness born from loss and grief, made him reconsider. This isn't over, Marcus said, turning to leave. Yes, it is, Daniel replied. You made your choice when you abandoned them. Live with it. After Marcus drove away, Lena collapsed into a chair, shaking. He'll make trouble. He always does. Let him try. But Marcus did more than try. First twist. That evening, Daniel received a letter from his old company. He'd been reinstated as lead engineer with an apology for wrongful termination after he saved a colleague. He realized the person who signed it was, Lena Moore, former HR director. "It's you?" he asked, amazed. "I didn't recognize you. You fixed the heating system for me 3 years ago." They both laughed at the coincidence. But then, Lena's car, parked in Daniel's garage, exploded. Daniel rushed to get Ruby and Lena to safety, pushing them away from the flames. Police investigated. Marcus had sabotaged it intentionally. The news spread. Headlines read, "Single dad saves mother and daughter from explosion." But there was more to the story. When investigators dug deeper, they found Marcus had been embezzling from his own business, blaming the missing money on Lena's medical expenses. The explosion was meant to look like an accident, eliminating any witnesses to his fraud. Marcus was arrested 3 days later. As he was led away in handcuffs, he screamed threats and accusations, but no one was listening anymore. Second twist. During a news interview, Daniel refused the hero label. "I'm not a hero. I just did what Christmas is supposed to be about, giving someone warmth when they're cold, shelter when they're lost, hope when they've forgotten what it feels like." His words went viral, shared thousands of times as the miracle of winter. But what the news didn't capture was the quiet moment later that night when Ruby asked him, "Mr. Daniel, are you going to be my daddy now?" Both adults froze. "Ruby," Lena said gently, we can't just—" "Why not?" the little girl asked with the devastating logic of children. "He takes care of us. He makes us happy. He loves us. Isn't that what daddies do?" Daniel knelt down to her level. "Ruby, your mom and I, we're still figuring things out. But you like us, right?" "I do, very much." "And we like you." "I know." "Then why can't we stay? Why can't this be home?" He looked up at Lena, who had tears streaming down her face. The question wasn't really Ruby's. It was both of theirs, unspoken but screaming in the silence. "Because," Lena finally said, her voice breaking, "good things don't happen to people like me. They don't." Daniel stood and took her hands. "Maybe they do. Maybe we just have to be brave enough to believe they can." The police finished their investigation. The house was cleared. The danger had passed. But the question remained, what happened next? That night, as snow fell again outside, Daniel found Lena sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the street. "You'll freeze out here," he said, sitting beside her. "I needed to think. About whether I'm brave enough." "For what?" She turned to him. "To stay. To believe this is real. To let Ruby love you. To let myself—" She stopped. "To let yourself what?" "To let myself love you too." The words hung in the cold air between them, fragile as snowflakes, heavy as the world. Daniel didn't speak. Instead, he took her hand and held it, letting the warmth between them say what words couldn't. A local news producer later wrote in her memoir, "I've covered hundreds of human interest stories. Most are forgotten within a week. But Daniel Ross and Lena Moore, they captured something we'd all lost sight of. That ordinary people doing kind things are the real miracles." The story went viral not because it was dramatic, but because it reminded us of who we want to be. 1 year later, Daniel's old house had been transformed into Home for Hope, a shelter for single mothers. Lena managed the fund while Daniel taught mechanical skills to those who needed work. Ruby, now 7 years old, called Daniel Dad. She asked, "Dad, can Lily see me?" Daniel smiled. "Definitely. And you make her proud." Christmas night. Snow fell gently. Daniel and Lena hung a star on the Christmas tree together. The light reflected on their faces, warm and peaceful. They read the card Ruby wrote together. "Home is where there's light, and where people don't leave you." Daniel looked at Lena. "Thank you for knocking on my door that year." She smiled. "If you hadn't opened it, my heart would still be frozen." The shelter had grown beyond anything they'd imagined. What started as one family finding refuge had become a movement. Other families came. Other people donated time, money, resources. The community, which had once seemed cold and indifferent, had rallied around this simple idea that everyone deserves warmth. Ruby had become the unofficial mascot of Home for Hope. She greeted new families, showed the children where the toys were, and told everyone with absolute certainty that Mr. Daniel and my mom can fix anything. On this particular Christmas night, 15 families were celebrating together in the converted community room. Children played while mothers shared stories, resources, and hope. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching it all, feeling Lena's hand slip into his. "We did this," she said softly. "You did this. You knocked on a door. You were brave enough to ask for help. And you were brave enough to give it." A little boy, no older than 4, ran up to them. "Mr. Daniel, Miss Lena, come see the snowman we made." They followed him outside, where a group of children had built an army of snowmen, each one different, each one loved. Ruby stood in the middle of them, directing like a general. "This one needs a carrot nose. That one needs a scarf." Daniel laughed, the sound free and genuine. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this light, this unburdened. Later, after the children were in bed and the mothers were settled in for the night, Daniel and Lena returned to the main house, the original house where it all began. They sat in front of the fireplace, just like that first night. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't knocked?" Lena asked. Every day I'm grateful you did. I almost didn't, you know. I walked past twice. I was so ashamed, so scared. But Ruby was shivering so badly, and I saw your light, and I thought maybe, just maybe. I'm glad you took the chance." She leaned against him. "Me too." On the mantel there were now 3 stockings, Lily's, preserved from the past, Ruby's, bright and new, and a third, Lena's, added this year. And hanging beside them, a small frame with a piece of paper. Ruby's handwriting from that first night. "Thank you for letting us stay. Love, Ruby and Mommy. From this day forward, I choose to leave my light on for those who are lost in the dark. I choose to open the door when someone knocks. I will live with kindness." 2 years later, Home for Hope had welcomed over 80 families. Daniel taught free vocational skills while Lena organized the annual Christmas festival. Ruby gave a speech. "Dad and Mom say Christmas isn't about receiving gifts, it's about giving someone hope." In the corner, Lily's photo hung next to the Christmas tree. Below it, a card Ruby placed. "Thank you, sister, for giving me a dad who knows how to love." Evening fell. Lena rested her head on Daniel's shoulder. "Do you still keep the porch light on?" "Always, in case someone gets lost." "Like we did that year?" "Yes, and maybe many others to come." Snowflakes fell gently through the open window. Daniel said softly, "Sometimes Christmas miracles are just someone knocking on the door and you being brave enough to open it." But the story continued beyond that moment. 3 years after that first Christmas, Daniel and Lena stood before friends, family, and dozens of the families they'd helped and exchanged vows. Ruby was the flower girl, carrying Lily's photo alongside her basket of petals. "So she can be here too," she explained to anyone who asked. In his vows, Daniel said, "I thought my life ended 4 years ago. I thought the best parts of me died with my wife and daughter. But then a woman and a little girl knocked on my door in a snowstorm, and I learned that life doesn't end. It transforms. It grows. It makes room for new love without erasing the old." In her vows, Lena said, "I was lost in more ways than one that Christmas. Lost on the road, lost in life, lost in myself. But you didn't just give us shelter. You gave us home. You showed Ruby what a real father looks like. You showed me what real love feels like. You saved us, and we saved you right back." The ceremony was simple, held in the main room of Home for Hope, surrounded by the people whose lives had been touched by one act of kindness that rippled outward into countless others. Afterwards, they danced. Daniel swept Ruby around the floor first, then Lena. And as he held his new wife, he looked over her shoulder at Lily's photo and knew, somehow knew, that she approved. Years passed. Ruby grew up, went to college, became a social worker specializing in helping homeless families. "Because I was one once," she told her clients, "and someone saw me as a person, not a problem." Home for Hope expanded to 3 cities. The original house remained, though, preserved as a reminder of where it all started. And every Christmas Eve, Daniel kept the porch light on. Sometimes people knocked, sometimes they didn't, but the light stayed on, a beacon in the darkness, a promise that somewhere, someone was watching for the lost, waiting to welcome them home. On the mantle, 3 stockings became 4 when Ruby had her own daughter, and then 5 and 6 as the family grew. But Lily's stocking remained, always the first, always filled with notes from the family about the good they'd done that year. Their way of showing her that her light still shined through them. And every Christmas morning, before anyone else woke up, Daniel would sit in front of the fireplace, sip his coffee, and whisper the same words. Thank you for sending them to me. Thank you for letting me love again. Thank you for the miracle of second chances. Outside, snow fell softly, covering the world in white, the porch light glowing warm against the cold, still waiting, still welcoming, still believing in the magic that happens when someone brave enough to ask meets someone brave enough to answer. If you believe kindness can still bring people home, share this story and subscribe to NL Touching Stories. We tell real moments that remind the world how good it feels to open the door and your heart when it matters most.